So I'm going to start here, the third paragraph. The 12 videos available in our Old Testament course gave a lot of basic information to help you better understand the whole Bible, although the focus was specifically on the book of Genesis. We discussed some of what happened in the beginning of our world up through the time of Joseph, Abraham's great-grandson, who became second in command to Pharaoh. God enabled Joseph to prepare for and deal with the problems of a long-lasting famine, Famine, which brought his whole family to live in Egypt. Now, these notes are prepared for second language speakers, and I occasionally put in some definitions, and I put in blanks for you to fill in words. That helps you to hold on to the thought and deepens your understanding. So that's why there are blanks there. What happened after Joseph died? All the rest of the books of the Bible reveal the answer to that question. In the midst of the accounts of real lives of the past, we can recognize ourselves. In reading about their experiences, we have a chance to learn the wisdom that God taught them. Would like to use our time together tonight to help you deepen your understanding of the historical books of the Bible so that you can feel comfortable reading them. In later webinars, I hope to address issues and ideas specifically connected with poetry and prophecy. As was mentioned in video lecture 1.3, a timeline can be a great help in fitting pieces of information together. The figure in your notes shows that line and adds a few more details. Why is this important? It prepares us to better grasp a wider picture of what the author is telling us. If you keep it before you as you read the historical books, it will create an awareness in your mind that will equip you to think more clearly. So Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah and the flood, all are covered in the beginning of time. There is a space in your line because we don't know how much time there was between these events. I put in the time that the alphabet was developed and started to be used because it helps us connect with what we know from secular history. Abraham lived around 2000 BC. His son Isaac, his son Jacob, and his 12 sons, including Joseph, were all around that time. Moses lived around 1500 BC, and David around 1000. These years are rounded off to make it easier to remember. Sometimes it really helps to have a picture in our mind of what was going on at what time. Point number 3. Out of jealousy, Joseph's brothers sold him as a slave. He later ended up in prison for something he had not done. But God gifted him with a special ability that brought him to Pharaoh's attention. Because he understood God's message given to Pharaoh in a dream, Joseph was released from prison and made second in command in Egypt. He was given the responsibility of preparing the country for survival during the predicted Great Famine. And it was the famine that brought his family to buy grain from him and settle there. After his death, the protected situation of the Israelites living in Egypt changed to a condition of slavery for about 400 years. Then, in response to their prayers, God raised up a reluctant leader, Moses, to bring them to the land promised to Abraham and his descendants. By reading the next 4 books after Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, you can find out a lot of information about the foundations of faith, about how the Lord showed everyone that the gods of Egypt were worthless. worthless. And you can find out how he prepared his chosen people for life in a covenant relationship with him. It is in Exodus chapter 3 that we learn God's own personal name for himself, Yahweh, which means I am. No matter what people may say, God exists. He is the source of all existence. Source, S-O-U-R-C-E. His name is holy. Even today, Jews do not pronounce it so as to be sure that it is always treated with respect. In translations of the Old Testament, that name is usually represented by the word Lord, written with all capital letters. If you read the Bible in English, in the Old Testament, you will always see Yahweh written as Lord, but you can remember that it is his personal name. In the book of Leviticus, we learn about the importance of holiness, Holiness, without which we cannot live in a close relationship with our holy Creator. There are precious lessons for us here and in each of the books of the Old Testament. But we won't learn what they are if we don't read it, if we don't think about it. When Moses died, God appointed Joshua to lead the Israelites into the land promised to Abraham. Their land was theirs by a promise of God, Promise. It was theirs by a promise of God, but they had to fight for it, Fight. Reading about it, we can see how Yahweh was with them when they put their trust in him and not in themselves. After Joshua died, God didn't appoint a main leader. Everyone did what he himself thought was good. The true motives of the heart, Motives, the true motives of the heart became obvious. For a little while, everyone continued to honor the Lord, to follow his directions. But when all went well, they took God's blessings for granted. They began to look around at their neighbors and wanted to live like them. Livelikethem. They wanted to live like their neighbors. They started to imitate them, choosing unrighteous behavior and worshiping handmade idols of false gods. The Lord turned the neighbors they had envied against the Israelites. When war came, they remembered Yahweh and called out to him to save them. God heard their prayers, responding by raising up people to lead them in battles against their enemies. When they were victorious, life became much better. They served the Lord for a little while, but then the cycle, Cycle, the cycle started over. You can read about this period in the book of Judges. The last judge was Samuel. You will learn about him in the books of 1 and 2 Samuel, which in Russian are called Первая и Вторая царств. It was during his life that the people began to ask for a king to lead them so that they wouldn't have to depend on God's guidance through his prophets. God allowed them to have their own way. THEIROWNDWAY. God allowed them to have their own way, and Samuel anointed the first two kings, Saul and David. The events of David's life, including his sins and failures, as well as his victories and some of his songs of deliverance, are recorded in these same books. The books of 1 and 2 Kings and 1 and 2 Chronicles tells us about the politics, politics. They tell us about the politics of the whole kingdom era, starting with Solomon and ending with Zedekiah. There is much to learn about this period. Remember, when you read history, you need to look below the surface, BELOW. Look below the surface. You need to not stop with understanding facts. Look for why it happened. Pay attention to the way people thought, THOUGHT. Pay attention to the way people thought, to how they behaved, and to the end results of their choices. On the timeline, let me make this just a little bit smaller and pull up the timeline so that you can see both of them together. I'll get this adjusted just a little bit. On the timeline, you can see a line going up and over right after David, shortly after 1000. That is to indicate the division of the kingdom into north and south, which occurred during the reign of Solomon's son, Rehoboam. The largest part of the country, the north, retained the title of Israel, Israel. Notice that the word Israel can refer to the northern kingdom or to the whole country. We need to look at the context to figure out which is meant. The southern part of the country is called Judah. Let me move this out of the way, and we'll pull up a map now. So here's the north. The division was just north of Jericho. Can you see it? Can you see the map?
Very clearly, thank you.
Okay. Here's Jerusalem. The north continued to include Tyre and Sidon, which is how far it had extended under David and Solomon. They're going to lose that before too long. The south goes all the way down to Kadesh Barnea. It's just to show you where the dividing line came, and you'll see on the side that there's Aram, which is also known as Syria, Ammon, Moab, and Edom. Israel fought wars with all of these people, and on the west is Philistia. Okay, so that's the map. Let's go back just to our notes now. Why did that division occur? When Solomon died and Rehoboam became king, he wanted power and wealth, but didn't want to serve his people, SERVE. Power and wealth, but not service. His people asked him to lower their enormous tax burden, but he refused and even threatened to make it heavier. So then, 10 of the 12 tribes rejected him as king, and the country split. God didn't forget them. He raised up one of God raised up one of Rehoboam's former officials, Solomon's official, Jeroboam, to lead the north, promising to be with him as he was with David, if Jeroboam would do what the Lord commanded. But this man chose to follow his own political reasoning rather than trust in the unseen God. He turned away to start a new religion, NEW. Those who wanted to remain faithful to their covenant with Yahweh moved to the south. The others willingly worshipped calf idols and engaged in the detestable, immoral practices of the Canaanites. The Lord sent prophets to call them back to him, but they refused to listen. refused. In the end, God allowed Assyria to utterly defeat them. The northern kingdom ended in 722 or maybe 721 BC, before Christ. The people of the southern kingdom followed the Lord when their king did, but their hearts, Hearts, their hearts weren't fully committed to him. They witnessed what happened when their northern relatives chose immorality. But like them, the people of Judah did not, did not want to listen to the Lord's messages sent through his prophets. They preferred to go to the temple and enact surface rituals, rituals. They wanted to enact surface rituals while also worshiping pagan gods and ignoring righteous behavior. To help them learn that he is a living God who sees the motives of their heart, God brought a hard lesson through Nebuchadnezzar II, who invaded the south several times, taking most of the Israelites captive to Babylon, Babylon. You notice that I still call them Israelites, even though they live in Judah. They kept that name. So Nebuchadnezzar took people from the south to Babylon. It was Nebuchadnezzar's armies that totally destroyed Solomon's temple. On the timeline, there's an open space to show the 70 years when the Jews were removed from their land. Point number 6, it was the king of Persia, Cyrus the Great, who ended that period of captivity after he conquered Babylon. He allowed all captives to return, return, to return to their homeland. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah tell us some of what happened when Cyrus issued that decree. Although it took many years, those who returned to Jerusalem succeeded in building a small, insignificant second temple, in spite of opposition from pagans who had started living there. That gives you a brief overview of the Old Testament era. More details can be found in the books we label as prophecy. These record many of the messages God sent to his people during this period. I'll talk a little about them in another webinar. Now, I want to speak about several things that will help you understand as you read the material covered in the historical books of the Bible. 1, some of these writings are a little complicated. Don't give up because of that. You can understand it if you take your time reading it and are willing to do a little research. You can find background information in secular history. You can also find out what Bible scholars have thought about a specific passage by checking the internet. Just Google Bible commentators. 2, it helps to know that the books of Chronicles were written at a little later period than the books of Kings. They cover much of the same events, but often add interesting details to what happened. 3, after the split in the country, the people living in the north and those in the south were still one nation, O-N-E. The author of these books took this into account when he recorded events. He named the year when something occurred by telling us who was king in each part of the country, E-A-C-H. An example can be seen in this passage from 2 Kings 13:1. In the 23rd year of Joash, son of Ahaziah, king of Judah, Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, became king of Israel in Samaria. He reigned 17 years. This pattern of telling us who was king in both the north and the south is repeated over and over in the books of Kings and Chronicles. Recognizing that pattern makes it easier to read. Point 4. Admittedly, there is an abundance of unfamiliar names in these books. A practice that will help you is just to start your own list of kings with 2 columns, TWO, one for the north and one for the south. As you read, list each king's name in the correct column and put a plus or minus mark next to it to indicate whether or not he was faithful to the Lord, Faithful. Writing it down like that forces us to focus better. Then I suggest that you find out how many of the 19 kings of the north chose to serve Yahweh and how many chose to serve their own desires for fame, power, and wealth. What about the kings in Judah? You know, you can find charts with such information on the internet, but it will be much more valuable in keeping your thoughts clear if you create your own list. The ideas will sink in deeper. Point 5. As you read, go beyond the surface. Look for the effect the actions of a king had on his people. Were their hearts drawn to live like their pagan neighbors, Pagan, or to be faithful, Faithful, to be faithful to their covenant with the Lord? Always, I want to remind you to not stop with simple facts. Look for what lessons, Lessons, what lessons the Lord was teaching through the events of their lives. Look for the long-term results for the country as a whole. We need those same lessons. God interacts with us just as He did with them, teaching us through the events of our lives. He expects us to look at the results of our choices and learn from them. 6. Finally, remember what God's purpose, P-U-R-P-O-S-E, what God's purpose was in choosing the descendants of Abraham to be a special people. They were to become a witness and an example for others to help all people learn how to live in a close relationship, relationship, a close relationship with our holy, living Creator. As we think about this history, it becomes obvious how interested God is in the way we live our daily life and how active He is in politics. He notices how we treat one another. He is able and willing to deal with the power structures of this world. It is He who, in His own time, rewards righteousness and punishes sin, lifts one leader up and brings another down. This is a particularly important point for Americans right now. Many of us wanted a different outcome for our last election. We need to remember that God is perfectly able to change things. Maybe He has a different lesson in mind for us to learn now than what we expected. Any effort you put into reading and trying to understand the historical books of the Bible will strengthen your confidence in the Lord. It will bring you many treasured insights into God's love for us and His desire to help us make good decisions in our lives, in our own lives. Okay, that's as much as I'm going to speak as part of a lecture. Do you have any questions for me?
Janine, could you remind the first books, are they also part of the historical books? I mean, Genesis and Exodus, are they also part of the historical books or not?
Yes, they are, although the first 5 are usually labeled the law.
Mm-hmm.
In my Old Testament course, the video course, I gave details on how to divide the books. And let me just pull out my Bible right now
Mm-hmm.
and take a look at the list of books. The books in the middle, from Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs, those are poetry. Everything before that is history.
Mm-hmm. So starting from Genesis, these are historical books. Okay.
It's Genesis all the way through Esther. When
Yeah.
you get to Job, that's
Mm-hmm.
poetry.
Good.
And then from Isaiah down, it's all prophecy.
Thank you.